What are nationally determined contributions? The Paris Agreement empowers countries to limit the global average temperature increase to as close to 1.5 degrees Celsius as possible to strengthen climate resilience and ensure financial flows are consistent with these goals. Nationally determined contributions, or NDCs, form the basis for countries to achieve Paris Agreement objectives. NDCs embody efforts by each country to reduce national emissions and adapt to the impacts of climate change. They communicate the ambitious efforts that a country will undertake to address climate change. NDCs are nationally determined, so that countries can put forward the most ambitious contributions that their national circumstances allow. NDCs contain information on targets, policies and measures for reducing national emissions and on adapting to climate change impacts such as floods or droughts. Some NDCs also contain information on either the needs for or the provision of finance, technologies and capacity building to enable ambitious climate actions. Countries communicate new or updated NDCs every 5 years starting in 2020. In doing so, they follow guidance adopted in Katowice in 2018 on information to facilitate clarity, transparency and understanding of NDCs. Subsequent NDCs should be more ambitious and not backslide to lower ambition. This is how, at a global level, our actions become more and more ambitious towards reaching the objectives of the Paris Agreement. Communicated NDCs are recorded in a registry maintained by UN Climate Change.
With increasingly hotter temperatures, working outdoors has become more difficult. For many nations around the world, seas continue to rise due to melting ice sheets consuming beaches and threatening homes. Storms are more frequent and increasingly intense, with waves surging inland, causing massive economic losses. These stark realities are precisely why it's so important countries around the world do their bit to push back on conditions that accelerate climate change. The Paris Agreement is the world's first international agreement that requires all signatory nations to cut greenhouse gas emissions linked to climate change and all of its devastating impacts. Under the agreement, the ambition to which participating countries are tied is holding global temperature increases to 2 degrees Celsius, preferably 1.5 degrees. The Paris Agreement is hugely ambitious, so it needs mechanisms to keep signatory countries on track with their commitments. One of the early tasks required by the agreement was setting nationally determined contributions, or NDCs. NDCs are targets each signatory state must submit to the UN every 5 years for reducing their national greenhouse gas emissions, with each successive NDC representing more emissions reductions. As a signatory to the agreement, TNT ratified it in 2018. But even before then, the Ministry of Planning and Development's climate change experts had begun quantifying our output of greenhouse gases and charting a plan to reduce those emissions by 2030. There's a lot at stake for small island states like ours in an increasingly warmer world. In TNT, our main emitters of greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide and methane come from 3 sectors: industry, power generation and transportation. Trinidad and Tobago's current nationally determined contribution is a commitment to reduce collective and cumulative emissions from those 3 sectors by 15% by 2030. Industry, which includes manufacturing and the energy and petrochemical sectors, will have to achieve emissions reduction through measures such as improved energy conservation and adoption of renewable energy like solar and wind, as well as addressing emissions arising from the industrial processes themselves. The power generation sector's plan for reduction includes increased renewable energy and more energy-efficient power generation. This involves upgrades to turbines that use both gas and steam to generate electricity, reducing reliance on natural gas by as much as 50%. Also, having consumers pay the true cost of electricity forms part of the overall approach to energy conservation. It's an important step towards getting homeowners to be more mindful of how they use electricity. In the transportation sector, reductions in emissions are expected to come from the promotion of alternative fuels such as compressed natural gas or CNG. But CNG is still a transitional fossil fuel, albeit with lower greenhouse gas emissions. Truly emissions-free transportation will come in the form of electric vehicles charged with electricity generated by renewable energy. In the public transportation sector, the target there is to reduce emissions by 30% by 2030. Implementing our NDC targets, though, will cost an estimated $2 billion for the 15% reduction in emissions from industry, power generation and transport. That goal will therefore include accessing external financing from international funding agencies like the Green Climate Fund. The 30% reduction in emissions from public transport, meanwhile, is expected to be financed with national resources. Under the Paris Agreement, TNT's next set of NDC targets are meant to be even more ambitious than the existing goals. This is because the world has acknowledged through the International Climate Treaty that limiting global warming to below 1.5 degrees Celsius is absolutely critical. Meeting our targets is only going to happen by closely following the NDC implementation plan, as well as taking advantage of technological opportunities as they become available. The NDC implementation plan lists the actions required in the different sectors, the agencies responsible for coordinating emission reduction projects, and says how long each activity should take. So, principles that buttress the Paris Agreement form the objective. The NDC plan is our way of achieving it. All our futures depend on how well we and the rest of the world bring the ambitions of the climate treaty forged in Paris into reality. Averting a hotter, drier future begins with the actions of today.